Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our LA County Library event, Author Talk with Mr. Robert Lee Johnson. I'm Sharmitria, librarian for LA County Library, and I'll be your host today. If you are interested in participating in more of our upcoming virtual programs, please visit us at lacountylibrary.org. As mentioned, today we have with us local historian and author, Mr. Robert Lee Johnson. He's going to unmute and turn on his video now so that we can all see him, in addition to his wonderful picture here. Mr. Johnson lectures on the subject of local history at colleges, universities, and museums in Southern California. Mr. Johnson is a member of the History Council and chairman of the Projects Committee at the California African American Museum, or CAM, in Exposition Park. He is a founding member of the Compton 125 Historical Society and was a consultant for the 2018 award-winning documentary Fire on the Hill, which focused on the Compton Cowboys. He's also consulted on other local documentaries. He's the author of 2 nonfiction books, Notable Southern Californians in Black History and Images of America Compton. Both can be placed on hold through our online library catalog. Excuse me. Welcome, Mr. Johnson. Thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Sharmitria.
We made it. We made it in.
Yes.
I'm super excited for this program, and I hope you guys all are too. So let's just jump right into it. First question for Mr. Johnson. What made you want to be a historian and author?
Well, I'll tell you, it wasn't something I woke up one morning and said, hey, let's, start writing. They were just contradictions. I grew up. I really enjoyed history as a kid. I went to Compton schools, and I was at a parochial school at Our Lady of Victory, and we were learning, history, the regular Greek history, Roman history, the so-called rise of Western civilization. Well, if there's a rise of Western civilization, what was going on in the Eastern civilization or South, or you see what I'm saying? I just kept having questions and they weren't getting answered. So I always had that in the back of my mind. And then when I got to the 7th grade, well, actually the 8th grade, I went to Davis Junior High School in Compton. General Benjamin O. Davis Junior High School is named after the leader of the Tuskegee Airmen. And the school was brand new. It was just open, and it was 2 blocks from my house. So I went to the junior high school there. I knew nothing about General Davis. And the school was new, and it was named in his honor. He actually came to the school. And, you got to think this is like 1969, and here's this ramrod straight black man who's very serious. I mean, if you wanted to look up heroic black man in the dictionary, Benjamin O. Davis would be there. So, I got to meet him. He was very friendly. When I say meet him, I mean, he was shaking everybody's hands, and he looked directly at you. He shook his hand, and he talked about the opportunity that we had at this brand new school that a lot of people didn't have, especially black kids did not have going to school. He said, look, we have this technology, which at the time were overhead projectors and such, but a brand new air-conditioned, carpeted school. And, he was impressed with the site. And of course, at the time, we were very impressed with Compton, which, at the time had elected the first black mayor west of the Mississippi. All black city council, majority black school board, and of course now we were naming schools after black heroes, and so I believe he was impressed with that. But we were very impressed with him, and with me, it just struck a chord where it said, "Who is he?" And I was surprised that I didn't know. So I looked to see who were the Tuskegee Airmen, which opened up a whole vast world of history that wasn't being taught. And then I happened to catch, in 1968, Bill Cosby. Okay, say what you want about Bill Cosby, but I love him for this. Bill Cosby, at the time before he became a megastar and everything, when it could have easily ended his career because he was still on I Spy.
Oh, yes, first show. The first major show of his.
Right, because he had done the albums and everything, but then he did a Black History documentary called Black History Lost, Stolen, or Stray. And it's on YouTube now. That video for me, as a young teenager, was very odd. I mean, he just really laid it out. And if you ever get a chance to look on YouTube and see it, you'll see, especially for that time, 1968, 1969, when he did it, it was just grammar. And you're going like, what? Bill Cosby?
Yeah.
But he was
a comedian? Yeah.
Yeah, and he wasn't funny. He was laying down some serious information, and he did it in a way. You have to remember, well, for those of you who can remember, some people weren't born yet. During that time, you very rarely saw Black people in positive roles on television.
Mm.
And Bill Cosby, he had the Bill Cosby show when he was a coach, before the Family one. But he was trying to do positive images on television early on when nobody else was doing that. When we were just a comic relief, or the butt of the joke or something like that. Instead, he said, here's some real people. And he carried that into that documentary, like I said, which was an eye-opener for me. So now I'm looking at things. I'm looking at history, United States history, which, of course, when I'm in the 8th, 9th grade, it seems like everything's taking place on the East Coast, the Civil War, all of these things. So I didn't think anything was happening West. They said cowboys, but, I didn't see, I mean, we had people riding horses in Richland Farms and everything, but, I wasn't making no cowboy connection, Wild West connection, actually. Yeah. So what happened was I went on a field trip. And this is why school field trips are so important. I mean, you notice the first thing that they want to cut out of school budgets for field trips. It's crazy. You need, students live in a community and they need to know what's in their community.
Yeah.
And we went on a field trip to the Dominguez Adobe, Manuel Dominguez ranch house. And the reason we went there was because Manuel Dominguez, actually his uncle, but it got down to him, had gotten one of the second land grant that was granted in Southern California. But his was actually the first that got worked. It basically encompassed the whole South Bay. It was like from the Los Angeles River east to Redondo Beach, from Rosecrans Boulevard, all the way to Palos Verdes.
Wow.
They owned all of it. And that's what I said, when I first saw it, I was like, wow, this one family owned all this. And then naturally, I started trying to figure out, well, how come, who owns it now? How do the people who own it now get it?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, as I'm coming up, I have some friends who were doing extra legal things, and they were getting, arrested for it. You get, whatever little things people were doing, they're getting arrested for, little crimes. But what I was doing is I was looking at this history. I'm looking at a huge crime.
Yeah.
That has been normalized and accepted. And that was the transfer of wealth from the Californios, the original owners of the land grants in Southern California. Over a 30-year period, that land is lost and now given to the new American settlers. Okay?
Yeah.
And so I was curious about that. Now, my mom was teaching a manpower class at Compton College. Cool. And she was trying to keep an eye on me. I have two younger brothers, but she was really trying to keep an eye on me. So she would have me come with her because it was an evening class. And so, I'm bored. I'm sitting there, it's nothing to do. My mom said, sign up for this class. And for a class called The History of Mexico. And of course, I'm a kid. I'm not realizing that California was part of Mexico. So it's really California history.
Yeah.
And so I took this this class. This is while I'm in high school, so I'm getting my American history class in the daytime, but now I'm getting this college course that's telling me the history of Mexico. Hey, we celebrate Barack Obama, first black president. Well, Mexico had a first black president in the 1820s. Okay, and then a couple after, they had a second one. I mean, they had already had two before we got finished with Abraham Lincoln. You see, so you start looking at, you go, oh, then I'm reading. You read about 1619. The first enslaved Africans come to North America, Jamestown, right? But the first slave revolt in the Western Hemisphere happened in 1519, 100 years earlier in what's now Mexico.
Yeah.
So
wow.
we're not learning that history. At one time there were actually more enslaved Africans in what's now Mexico City than there were Spaniards.
Wow.
So when I say Governor Pio Pico, the last governor under Mexican rule, and that he was of African descent,
yeah,
I had Black people look at me and say, "Now, how is that possible?" Okay. But it's because because our when we're taught history, it stops at the border.
Yeah.
We are ignorant of a lot of the history just in this hemisphere simply because it's not taught to us, but it affects us.
Yeah.
And so these were the contradictions, to answer your question, these were the contradictions that were coming up as a kid to me.
Yeah.
When I started seeing, I'll give you a personal contradiction. When I was telling you, when I was a kid, I was going to Our Lady of Victory, right? I was going to school. So at that time in Compton, you still had white kids because the Our Lady of Victory Catholic school was in East Compton. It's still there. It's on Palmer and okay. So you still had white kids there, and then they weren't happy. You had more Black kids coming in, and you had Hispanic kids, right? But what I noticed with the Hispanic kids was that a lot of them were just as dark as any of the Black kids.
So the kind of colorism comes in, and the kind of
when I was a little kid, when the first little girl caught my eye was this girl named Joanne Martinez. Yeah, because we didn't understand the extent
shared
of the
history, that shared history and the different cultural manifestations of that. So that's fascinating. So you had to really you got all these different points that really brought you to, I want to explore this. As I get older, I want to know more about this.
Right. And the contradictions were just rising. And of course, with my political activity became more, there were more questions.
Yeah. Because how did your work, how do you feel wanting to be the historian, the author, how has that affected, your community involvement? Because, I read off, honestly, your biography is just like a sliver of just everything that you've accomplished and so much of your community involvement and how much of a community figure you're known as. How do you feel those two kind of intersect, the work you do combined with the community involvement you have?
Well, actually, I think they complement each other because what we're all trying to do is basically, I put the pieces in a puzzle to figure out what the hell is really going on. When it all comes down to it, the reason why we consume information is we're just trying to figure out, why is this happening? What is the history behind this? How do we get from here to there? Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I guess in that, go ahead.
So, but in that vein, by putting these things together, I'm seeing that, especially, dealing with the state and how things were set up, there's a lot of hypocrisy involved, especially when you're dealing racially.
Okay. So in that vein, what do you want the world to know about South LA, about Compton, about Willowbrook, about Watts, about this area? What do you want the world to know that you think that they don't know, or that, you know?
Well, I'll say this. I want people to know the history and to realize that, we're always told this story like, woe is us, it's like, here are all the bad things. But what we really have to understand is that there's always been resistance.
Mm-hmm.
That the Black community we weren't just sitting there, just taking this stuff. We were trying to figure out ways how to survive. Think about it. People who came to California, or just Black people, period, it was very difficult to get a job because the majority culture wanted to shoehorn you into domestic work, shelter. Yeah. There were just certain jobs for Black people. And then, of course, there were the jobs for the white men. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how, when we talk about Jim Crow, I told somebody the other day, I said, look, Jim Crow segregation was just affirmative action on steroids for white people. And you guys have had this, forever, from the start of the country till right now. Okay, so when Black people are looking for reparations or just looking for an even playing field, they shouldn't be stigmatized for that because they're just trying to balance things out.
Yeah,
you see what I'm saying?
From what historically has been unfairly advantaged.
I'm gonna give you a prime example, and it's probably what brought most of our families, if we look at our history, here to California. Those of us who are in California.
Mm-hmm.
A. Philip Randolph and Walter White from the NAACP. A. Philip Randolph was with the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and other civil rights people went to FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, in June of 1941, and they said, Mr. Roosevelt, we are going to have a march for jobs and equality on Washington. It was going to be the first march on Washington. Okay. I mean, for Black people this century.
Yeah.
And this is at the start of World War II. Okay. Well, some of us might be aware that Nazi Germany took a lot of their, they used as a template for their discrimination against the Jews in Germany. They used Jim Crow segregation laws as their template. Yeah,
that has been definitely something documented.
Exactly. I mean, they looked when they wanted to oppress a minority group, they looked to the United States as a leader in that, and actually so did South Africa. But and so what was happening was, on the international stage, FDR was criticizing Hitler. What you doing to the Jews? I mean, this was his thing. And now the Negroes were about to show up and say, we're going to have a giant demonstration in D.C. against discrimination.
Yeah.
The same thing that Hitler's doing. Okay. So FDR couldn't have that because he was trying to keep the moral high ground.
Mm-hmm.
So he made a deal. He basically said, I will sign an executive order to end discrimination in federal contracts, which meant the defense industries and any industry that had a federal contract.
Mm-hmm.
Now that said, to a Black man in the South, what that said is, I can make a living wage because now there wasn't a difference between a white man's wage and a Black man's wage. I can make the same wage. I can make a living wage. And like I wrote down somewhere, that was like ringing a dinner bell. Let me get out of here so I can go work in a defense factory and make some money. And
it's opportunity. It's access to opportunity.
Yes, exactly. And what do people want? Opportunity. We want opportunity. And when we say opportunity, look, the average person all we want is a decent house, decent schools, a decent place to work. Okay, safe communities. I want my child to be able to be educated and have a shot like everybody else. We're not asking for much. It's the American dream thing. Okay, so that led to that second great migration, especially our families that came from Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas. Okay.
Guilty.
Yes. These are the reasons why. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, even today, this is the reason why people pulled up stakes, left their family and friends and everything they knew to go to something that was new.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, at the turn of the last century, there were about 2,000. The census said there were like 2,000 Black people in the city of Los Angeles. Okay. The turn of the
Okay.
There was a railroad strike, and Mexican American railroad workers, okay, Chicano railroad workers said, "We're going on strike because y'all not treating us right. You don't want to pay us right." Okay, this is like I said, 1902.
Okay.
And what the railroad did is they said, "Okay, you're going to strike." They went down south and they got a little over 2,000 Black people. Brought them up from the south to break the strike. So they were already pitting Black against brown.
Yeah.
Okay. But what it also did was it doubled the Black population in Los Angeles.
Oh, to 4,000.
then what they did, the railroad, because they wanted to keep the workers, they sold them houses. So on railroad land, they built these houses. So you were able to buy a house for $5 down, $5 a month. And that was the actual start of the Black community on Central Avenue at 5th and Central, because 5th and Central was the old railroad station. Okay.
Wow.
And then as our community began to grow, relatives coming out, friends coming out, because really have you didn't have legalized segregation. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you still, there were no signs, but you knew where you could go and where you couldn't go.
Yeah.
And for newcomers, a lot of times that was very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they have a different idea of what they could do, and then it's about realizing kind of how it is at that time in that city or that place.
Well, in Los Angeles, one of the worst things was that, you could go to the Biltmore for breakfast and get turned down. We're not serving you. They come in for lunch when they have a different manager and they'd serve you.
Oh, so the inconsistent. There was a part in your book that I mentioned where it was like there was that inconsistency in. I think the term that was used was James Crow Esquire.
Yes. And then they came up with the Shank Law for a while, where say like a Black person could come into your establishment. You would charge white people a nickel for a beer, but you could charge Black people $5 for that same beer. So they played games. Yeah, they played games like that. So
it's very inconsistent.
Finally, but it wasn't until 1918 that we first get a statewide Black person elected, which was Frederick Roberts, who was a direct descendant of Thomas Jefferson and Sally.
Yes, it was mentioned in your book. Yes.
Yeah, so he became assemblyman in 1918.
So then this gets to my next question is, who do you think is the most notable Southern Californian in Black history? Or stop! Oh my gosh!
I'm gonna say this to everybody who's listening. It's you. It's like you look in the mirror.
Wow.
Okay, you are the most significant person in Black history because you're making that history.
Wow.
Somewhere in your family, there's a link. We're a progression of the people who left, their farm or their homes or their neighborhoods to come to California for a better life. Okay, we are and then when we realize that, and we look in the mirror and realize that when they were talking about I wanted a better opportunity, that those relatives, those ancestors now for the most part, were talking about us. So what we have to do is ask ourselves, what are we doing with our lives to honor them?
Wow.
To honor their optimism, to honor what they did with lives so that our lives could be as they are today. So
That's
I had to
amazing.
think about that. I was thinking about that.
Oh, wow.
And there's so many people, but
there's a comment that just said very inspirational. Definitely agree. I don't want to be corny, but I got chills a little bit. Wow, that's a great answer. I was then gonna ask the question of what time in Southern California and Black history do you think was the most impactful or affected California the most? And I know we got an inkling of your answer, but do you have an answer for that one?
Well, I'm probably going to say now.
Now,
today. See, have a chance. The past is written. The past is done. We've done the past. Okay, we stand on the shoulders of the past. Okay, if you Camilla Harris, she stands on the shoulders of a Charlotta Bass. Okay, Charlotta Bass ran for vice president on the Labor Party ticket in the 1950s. Okay, so she stands on Charlotta Bass's shoulders. Okay, you always like to correct people. Shirley Chisholm was the first Black woman to run for the nomination of a major party for president. Okay, she ran for the nomination. She didn't run for president. She was running for the nomination for president. Yeah. Okay, McGovern got the nomination that year.
Yeah.
But and that was in 1972. In 1968, Charlene Mitchell ran for president on the party ticket. She ran for president.
Wow.
And that was a national ticket at that time. So, we stand on shoulders. Well, Charlene Mitchell's still alive right now. I believe she's in her 90s. But we stand on their shoulders. So today, okay, how we used to say, seize the time. This is the time. Yeah. The contradictions that we've looked at are still here.
Yeah.
Well, last time I looked, about an hour ago, police are still gunning down unarmed Black men and women, okay?
Yeah.
They're still handcuffing Black children and leaving them out in the weather.
Still having protests, still, trying to create that change. And I guess
we're still trying to deal with education. We're still trying to, because now the idea is not just access to education, but what are you being taught?
Yeah. Is it everything that you've discussed here, and is it something particularly relevant to Southern California too, as much as it needs to be?
So Sharmitra, when we look at our struggles, then we realize that whoa, this stuff just didn't fall out the sky. I love to talk about Velma Grant.
Ooh, that was just fascinating figure. Tell us more about her, of course.
Well, I want to set the stage for Velma Grant. Because again, like I said, I don't like just to tell some tragic story. I like to talk about our victories also. So, but I'm gonna start with this. 1927, the mid-20s, Dr. Gordon, okay? Dr. Gordon is with Liberty Savings. He syndicates the idea for a new Black community away from Central Avenue. This is in the 20s. And those of us, just if you know what was going on in the 20s, you had Bloody Summer of 1919, 1921. You had Tulsa, Oklahoma. Black communities were just being burned to the ground. So anyway, this enterprising Black man, Dr. Gordon, decides to build a community. He syndicates everything through white financial institutions, okay, as well as the Black Liberty Savings and Loan. And they were going to set up right where El Camino College and Alondra Park are today. Okay, that was the land that was going to be Gordon Manor. At the time, they were building the refinery, the oil refinery that's on Crenshaw Boulevard, between Palos Verdes and Manhattan Boulevard. But there were white folks who were living in Palos Verdes, like the Olmsted brothers and Henry O. Melvin, who just shot to fame with the Teapot Dome trials and everything. And no, Negroes are too close, even though there was an oil refinery in between them.
Yeah.
And they leaned on the Board of Supervisors to condemn the project.
Ah.
So of course it doesn't happen. They lie, say, we're going to build a park. 30 years later, they build El Camino College and they build Alondra Park in the 50s. Okay, but it denied people. What you're looking at is the denial of the ability to build wealth. Okay,
Yes.
Because most communities, you build that household wealth by buying a home.
Yeah, that access to opportunity.
Exactly. So that doesn't happen. Okay. "20 years later, the end of World War II, the GIs are coming home. Black GIs, find that Black community is overcrowded, because you have the migration and you had restrictions. You had the restrictive covenants, so we couldn't expand. So you had slum-like conditions, overcrowding. But these GIs come home with the GI Bill so they could buy a house and get an education. Velma Grant, who had been in real estate since the 30s, she sees the opportunity. To this day, I still can't figure out how she did it. I'm trying to figure it out. She gets an almost $3 million loan and buys like 95 acres of land and builds houses. She gets Paul Williams, the designer to the star. The designer to the tech to the stars, to design her homes. Okay.
Wow.
And this is 1946.
Yeah, that's wow.
Okay. She builds a whole neighborhood of quality homes. Her watchwords were quality material, quality workmanship. And if you look at those homes today, they're still quality homes. Okay, almost 75 years later.
It's amazing.
The houses, George Washington Carver Manor is the name of the place that she built. And it's right there at Stanford and El Segundo, right in there where Enterprise Park is.
Wow.
She also built the shopping center on the corner of El Segundo and Avalon. Okay, so how come we don't know the name of Velma Grant?
Yeah, it's reading about that in your books, and then it's the story is fascinating, and her influence is seen today. And yes, it is something that you feel people should know more about. So
that's what I mean by it's not just having access to it. What are they teaching us? See, she was victorious. Okay, she was able to do something that Dr. Gordon wasn't able to do, but 20 years later, because they kept trying, and they said, okay, we're going to build a community where Black people could have quality homes. She went and did it again in the 50s. She built the Carverdale homes in San Bernardino off of Medical Center Drive.
Yeah.
Okay, she made a lot of money. Okay. Then she bought a ranch, Arizona, and started growing cotton. Okay. This was a fascinating woman. We don't know.
Fascinating.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then here's another look. 1969, the city of Compton elects the first Black mayor of a major municipality west of the Mississippi. When he becomes mayor, he comes in, he has a majority Black city council, a majority Black school board. Okay.
And this is Mayor Dollarhide.
Douglas F. Dollarhide. He appoints the first Black police chief in west of the Mississippi.
Wow.
He appoints the first Black fire chief west of the Mississippi. He's elected 4 years before Tom Bradley becomes mayor of Los Angeles. Okay. Now, when Tom Bradley becomes mayor of the second largest city in the United States, out of 15 city council people, 2 or 3 of them are Black. Dollarhide has a majority Black city council. Okay. But how come we don't know the name of Douglas F. Dollarhide? He was the son of his father had been enslaved.
Wow.
He was the son of a slave. He fought in World War II in the segregated army. Okay, he becomes the first Black mayor, okay, of a major municipality west of the Mississippi, and we don't know his name. We don't, you ask the average person, Douglas who? Okay, so we have to look at our own history. Because if we don't tell our stories, they'll tell our story, but they'll get it wrong.
Yeah. So you agree. So this whole conversation really comes down to like us as a community just really needing to amplify these stories for ourselves and for others. Just like you were mentioning what we want people to know or the world to know about South LA. These are the stories that people on the ground should know and be able to tell, I guess, is maybe what I'm getting.
Exactly. There's a Dr. Jefferson, okay, has written a book on Black leisure under Jim Crow.
I'm meaning to read that book. It looks delightful. Yeah.
Yeah, Allison Jefferson. And what it does is, because it's telling a story of resistance, that's what I like about it. Bruce's Beach was resistance. Val Verde. When I was a kid, my parents would take us up to Val Verde. There was no Magic Mountain, so when we were heading that way, we were going to Val Verde, which was basically a playground for Black people.
Yeah.
There was a pool out there. We had different events, great picnics. All the different unions were out there, and anybody who went there will tell you that picnic tables just laden with food. It'd be a picnic table full of barbecue. It's like, okay, all the people who would barbecue, they would have contests between Texas barbecue, Chicago, with sauce, no sauce. They had all that, and to be a kid, they had another table full of desserts, all kinds of pies and cakes, and you were playing baseball, swimming.
Yeah.
It's the summertime. It was great.
You were the winner. As a kid, you were just the winner that day because you got to just try it all.
See, these are the stories that have to be told also.
Yeah. So what advice? Oh, yeah. So I was just going to ask.
We are not a docile people. We weren't just sitting there getting kicked in the head and saying, "Can I have another, sir?"
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I had
No. You're talking about your childhood and just how important it was for you to get those images and those experiences, and also in your work to just kind of explore where you said there were those moments of joy and triumph and community and togetherness. So like, what advice do you have for a younger generation who may be interested in becoming writers or historians, or maybe don't even know that they're interested because they maybe don't know that it's an opportunity for them?
So, well, first, depending on how young, I would say, talk to your elders, because they know how they know the story of how the family got here, or how we get to where we were to where we are. Yeah. We need to know those family stories. There is a story in every family. You just have to ask and find out what it is.
That's so true. Yeah.
So find out what the story is. Sometimes the story is you. But remember we stand on the shoulders to get to where we are. So what was the story of that person that that decided to make that train trip or car trip to come out here? What was their story? What was going on with them? What was that family like? What were they trying to? I talked to a lot of people who were. It's like when you talk about some of the deep South states, even like like Mississippi, Alabama. And some of them just said, you know what? My father sent me on the train. I was 13 years old, and the landowner, the white guy, started looking at me. And my father knew he couldn't protect me, so he sent me away.
Wow.
You hear stories like that, but the majority of the stories you'll hear are stories of survival. And once we understand once we, as Black people, we understand our story, especially in leaving the terrorism of the South, then we can be more empathetic to other people's stories, the people who are leaving the death squads and the terrorism from countries in South America, that was supported like Ronald Reagan and I always tell people a couple of things. Things happen, nothing happens in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Our community was I'm going to the crack wars. We just had cocaine falling out the skies in the 80s. You could walk out your house and there's cocaine on the ground. I'm serious.
Oh.
Okay. There's so many rock houses. After the weekend, you come on Sunday and people would have dropped, they would have dropped their little rocks they were buying because, it was all over the place. And we have to ask ourselves how to get like that. Well, we understand that Ronald Reagan's foreign policy in South America, especially his support of the Contras, led to the cocaine epidemic. Okay? Because the Contras, when their funds got cut off by Congress, they decided to fund themselves, and they had access to a lot of cocaine. I did an interview with for the Compton Historical Society for one of the police officers in Compton, John Rick Baker. And I believe the interview is still running on the Compton Historical Society website. When I did the interview, I asked him the question. He was a sergeant at the time, and I asked him a question. Why?
No, it's okay. Take your time.
Okay. I asked him a question. I said, he was telling me that they knew where all the drug dealers were and where the drugs were coming from and everything. So I said, well, why didn't you guys go after the big guys? You knew who they were. Why didn't you go after the large distributors? Yeah. And he told me, he said, because they were blocked by the feds. Okay. And that's in the interview. If you look at that interview, he confirms two things: that guns were being dumped in Compton in the 80s. Wow. Okay, this is Compton Police Department saying it. That the guns were being dumped in Compton. They were in train car left open on the train tracks. And it's funny because in Chicago, they were saying the same thing was happening to them. Yeah. That all these guns are showing. Okay. Wow. And then he also said the federal government, he was talking about how, we wanted to go after the big guys, but we were fed, so the DEA. Wow. So we have to be able to put things in context. Things just don't happen. Okay? Yeah. Things just don't happen to our community. What did the crack epidemic do to our community here in Southern California? There used to be a black belt from almost downtown Los Angeles all the way to Compton. Okay. Wow. At one time, you could just drive and it was all the Black community. And of course, now that's broken up, from if you look pre-1980, the population, and you look now, that has been broken up. And one of the reasons why is because during the crack wars, you had, we talk about white flight. Yeah. We had a Black middle class flight. Black people started going, to Cerritos, Lancaster, other places because they were trying to get away from the crack wars. Okay. Yeah. So Moreno Valley, San Bernardino, they were trying to move away. Yeah. Wow. Now, at the same time, refugees who were trying to escape the terrorism that was going on in their countries, from Guatemala to El Salvador to Mexico, okay, they're coming in. And now where are they going to come? Limited funds. They're going to the most, what was looked at as undesirable areas, the areas that were in the middle of a crack war. Yeah. So you had Hispanic families coming in.
So then it changes those demographics because, like you said, nothing happens in a vacuum, and history just affects the present.
Exactly. So it's actually changed the demographic, and it's actually changed the voting bloc. And we'll
Oh,
start to
yeah.
see the result of that in the next few years, because when it first started, you had a lot of people who came who were not able to vote. But now their children are growing up and coming to the age where they can vote, and that's going to change the voting demographics.
And that's something that's a national thing, but it's like a little micro example
Exactly.
of how it is our nation, our country, our culture changes and shifts. You have so much. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, someone just asked me just the other day. They said, "Well, when will Compton get a Hispanic mayor?" I said, "Any day now."
Fantastic.
It's inevitable.
Yeah. So
because of the demographic change.
Yeah. You have so much information, you know so much information off the top of your head. In your acknowledgments for Compton Images of America, your book, you mention our Black resource librarian, Miss Rose Mitchell, as a helpful source. Just to ask, like, it seems that libraries have really helped you in your research. What ways do you find that has been so helpful for you?
Say something. One of the things that Thomas Jefferson did right, and then Benjamin Franklin, I'm sorry, was come up with the library system. We don't have to rely on somebody else telling us. We can go search out this information ourselves. I go to, when I was a kid, my mom took us all to the library. One of the first things we did, we got a library card.
Awesome.
And we were in the library, and we learned how to use the library, because that's our repository of information.
Mm-hmm.
And you can argue with it. It's like, okay, because the reason Images of America Compton, I wrote that because there was no book saying anything about Compton.
Mm.
Okay, I'd been looking, and I looked on that series, and they anything. And I was like, shoot, because I travel around and I'm doing talks, and I would get some of the local books so I could get a little local flavor. It was like, nothing on Compton. Well, better write it yourself. and
well, it's a great book. So great.
Thank you.
So helpful.
I'm thinking, because I grew up in Compton, I know something about it. But when I started doing the research, I found out how much I didn't know.
Ooh,
the first international air meet in the United States, Compton. Okay, right there in Dominguez Hills. And people say, oh, it was Carson. There was no such thing as Carson.
Wow.
Okay, Carson doesn't become a city until 1968. 1910, okay, international air meet. All right. And what that really means is that the aerospace industry that dominated Southern California for years, especially after World War II, started at that air meet in 1910. Okay, Compton, agricultural. Compton was the, people always find it's funny. Compton was actually the first white city in the South Bay, in that area.
Really?
Yeah, because the majority of the cities in the 1850s and 1860s were already established, like before Spanish and then Mexican rule. Okay, so like El Monte, Los Angeles, those areas were established. Everything else was probably land grants. Okay, so you went out to somebody's
land
ranch.
Grants you mentioned.
In the 1850s, Manuel Dominguez deeded 4,600 acres to his favorite niece as a wedding present. She borrowed $1,000 on it, wasn't able to pay it back, so she lost the 4,600 acres. It was sold at auction to two land investors, Gibson and Temple, who eventually sold it to a Methodist agricultural colony that was in Stockton. And they came back from Stockton. G.D. Compton was the leader.
Oh. Okay.
So
there's the name.
There you are. So that's when late 1860s. And when they first arrived, of course, it's raining cats and dogs and everything. And they weren't calling him Griff Dickinson. for the GD there. I'm sure they had other words for them. They were mad because they were being flooded. They said, we just spent our money and now we traveled all this way and it's flooding.
Yeah.
He got them to hold on and appeal to their faith. And as the waters receded,
yeah,
they went and did their planning and everything because people had bought, they bought 40 acre lots, 80 acre lots like that.
Yeah.
The majority of them were able to pay off their mortgages with their first harvest.
Oh,
and that
amazing.
Was the first time you started hearing Compton referred to as a paradise. And see, how we describe things is very important. Okay. Yeah. They saw Compton as a paradise because they were able to grow everything and make their money. Compton was huge agriculturally.
Mm.
One thing you don't hear about Compton, even though we elected the first Black mayor, majority city council, majority Black school board, you never heard Compton described as the citadel of Black political power.
Mm.
Okay? Because the white supremacist narrative does not say that Black people can run a city that successfully. And especially in 1969, when they didn't even believe that a Black man could quarterback an NFL football team, let alone run a city.
Yeah.
So when Dollar Hyde wins, they're not saying, yay, Dollar Hyde, he won. They're saying Dollar Hyde wins, Negro experiment in self-government.
Ooh.
Okay?
Goodness.
Because white supremacy basically says we're inferior. You can't run something without white people.
Mm.
Okay, not a city. So Compton went against the grain.
Yeah.
But in order to stay in that box, that white supremacist box, Compton had to fail. So all of a sudden you're getting a lot of negative media, crime, chaos, corruption. If you look at the list of corruption convictions for cities in the East County,
yeah,
Compton is nowhere near the top.
Yeah.
Okay. You can look at Maywood, Bell, Vernon. They're way ahead of Compton. But the image that you get is that, Compton's crazy.
This focus on that narrative and that story. So speaking of stories, I heard that you're working on some other book on another area. Did you want to tell us a little bit more about that? The information about Compton is fascinating. It's in your book, Images of America, Compton. But again, I heard that you were working on something else in the same area.
Well, don't let me forget, Notable Southern Californians in Black History has a chapter on chapter 5. But I'm working on the history of Watts Willowbrook, the community of Watts Willowbrook. That's where we start talking about Velma Grant. Of course, Watts at one time was its own city. Mm. And they were on the verge of electing a Black mayor in the mid-20s, which is one of the reasons why Watts City Council voted to be absorbed by the city of Los Angeles. Los Angeles annexed Watts in the 20s. But it was to avoid the accumulation of Black political power. Matter of fact, the Ku Klux Klan, which was headquartered in Willowbrook, actually plotted to, to disgrace the man by kidnapping him and we're going to pour liquor over him and put him in a car crash and basically say he was drunk driving. The only problem was the Klansmen, to show how blatant they were, they actually wrote it down in a letter. And the letter starts off, "This is what we should do."
Oh, goodness. Okay.
On the bottom, he signed it. And what had happened was a sympathetic policeman who was involved in the raid of the Ku Klux Klan sent the letter to Charlotta Bass, who printed it in her newspaper. Okay. And kind of exposed that. But the city council decided to allow Watts to be annexed by Los Angeles. And that made that whole conversation moot. But interesting thing.
Wow. I'm excited. I'm excited to see all the information that you find. Being the manager of the Willowbrook Library myself, I know that the community here would love a book just really getting in depth and highlighting just all the different ways that the current community comes to be. So thank you, Mr. Johnson. We could honestly talk all day. I would love it, but we do want to open it up for attendee questions. But did you have anything that you really wanted to quickly add or let attendees know about your work, about you, about South LA before we pop it over for attendee questions?
I think somebody asked a question about the book I had mentioned, Dr.
Yes,
Allison Jefferson.
Yeah, would you say the title of the book and the author again?
Yeah, it's Dr. Allison Jefferson, and I believe the name of the book is Black Leisure During Jim Crow. And I might be saying that wrong, but look up Dr. Allison Jefferson. We'll find
it, and we'll try to put the link for it in the chat. So we're now going to open it up for attendee questions. For those of you who do have to leave, thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this interview with Mr. Johnson. As you can see, he's a font of knowledge. If you want more information about our other virtual programs, please visit our library website at lacountylibrary.org. For the latest library news and events, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at LA County Library. Now let's go ahead and take a look at audience questions. Let me go ahead and pull them up really quick and take a look at the chat. Give me 1 second. So I do want to give you a comment though. We have a comment in the chat that's like, this is a wonderful presentation. This is stuff we don't learn about in history class. This attendee is grateful for the stories of the Black community here in SoCal, and they can't wait to check out your books. So I did just want to hype you up really quick. So we do have a question here that's growing up in Compton. You've seen a lot of changes. Do you believe folks will come back to Compton, Willowbrook area as homeowners as they once were? So do you feel that people who have maybe grown up here are seeing there are recent changes? Do you feel that there can be an exodus back here?
Oh, yes. You know, you're actually even seeing new housing stock being built. There's a new community that I think just opened up right next to where Carver Manor is. Okay. And I wish I could think of the name of it. I can't call the name of it. I want to say Magnolia something, but with new housing stock, because most of the housing stock is coming up on. So as you start seeing people building new homes, I think that will bring in people. What keeps people away is substandard housing. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think that we're starting to see is that people realize that, it was funny. Somebody told me a year or so ago, so one of the hottest real estate markets right now is in Compton. So, yeah, people need housing. Yeah. And as long as they keep building affordable housing, people will return and to provide infrastructure. And I believe that's what's going on now. The idea, you have to have quality schools. Yeah. And the only way you have quality schools is, you're going to have property taxes and sales tax to support those things. And that comes through also building the building of homes and the bringing in of business. We saw a time in Compton when a lot of services left the area. You couldn't get a delivery for anything. Yeah. So as you're seeing the supermarkets and everything coming back into the community, that's going to make a difference.
Fantastic. Yeah, I hope so too. And like you said, I think there's a lot of things to suggest that it's definitely a possibility. We have another question from one of our attendees. They're asking, what gave Mr. Johnson the courage to be involved in such important issues in the community? What would he say to a child who notices injustice in the community but feels too small to make a difference?
One of the things that I think we get tricked by is that we have to do some kind of big event or some kind of big act to make something. It's the little thing. It's asking the right questions. You know, I mean, look in the mirror and how are you educating yourself with certain issues? You know, the things that touch your heart if you go someplace and you say, hey, this can be better, and I think I know how to do it, then do it. Find some other people who are thinking like you, like how you're thinking.
Yeah.
You know, give you a good example. The Black Panther Party developed breakfast programs for the community. Okay.
And you had been a member, correct?
Yes, I was a leading member of the Compton branch of the Black Panther Party. But just didn't put these programs together for the fun of it. It was the idea that we know that kids are going to school hungry. Instead of just talking about, oh my goodness, the hungry kids, they can't learn.
Yeah.
Together in unity, together we can do something about it. Together.
Yeah.
And so what the Black Panther Party did was first we solicited donations to from the businesses, and we said, look, you guys are making money off the community. You can give something back. It's a write-off. Come on. So you can get food. But people would get up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to make breakfast for kids, okay, and get them ready to school with something hot in their stomach, okay. So the successful breakfast program wasn't one that was run by the Black Panther Party, but it was one that was taken over from the Black Panther Party by the parents. That was a successful breakfast. Because now the parents, they're meeting their neighbors, their community. Okay, when we foster community, there are no hungry children.
Yeah.
Think about in our past when Black folks were on survival mode. If somebody had something, they shared it. I would go down and see my great uncles. They would get up early in the morning and go fishing. I mean, those brothers, we'd be coming back from partying, and we'd stumbling in the house about 5 o'clock, and they were talking about, we going fishing, you want to come? And it's like, no. They'd jump in their boat, and they would come back with all this fish. And I can remember my Uncle Easy, he would just holler to the neighbors, tell your mama to fry up the grease, we got this fish. They'd fillet the fish for them, and everybody were houses down.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's community. That's community.
Communal care and things like that.
Exactly. And when we create community, see now I'm just as invested in you and your family as I'm invested in mine, because we all know that our fates are together. So now I want to make sure that school down the street is treating all the children right. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When if something happens with the police, guess what? We all showing up.
Yeah. Wow.
The difference. When you don't know your neighbor and something happens, then what are you doing? I'm talking to a virtual stranger. Help me. Yeah. So the Black Panther Party was doing with these programs was fostering community.
Yeah.
Creating community institutions. Okay. And that's when I tell somebody who's young, they say, what can I do?
Yeah.
Look in your community and see what needs to be done.
Wow.
Teach another kid how to read. Help them with their homework.
Yeah.
We had in Compton, we had the Compton Neighborhood Tutorial Program, which was one of the programs from the Compton branch of Black Panther Party. We used the library. We went to the Compton County Library. We brought kids in, helped them do their homework, helped them read. We had volunteers that came from Cal State Dominguez Hills. Okay, there was a program in those days called Epic. So they got 3 units. We had a college kid to mentor these elementary and junior high school kids.
That's amazing.
Okay. We did it. We didn't have any money. That's why we went through Epic and got them 3 units. But we had the will, and the children had the need.
And the drive to just do that community work.
And I'll tell you something. A lot of that program came off the idea when I was a kid. Mrs. Filer and Mrs. Zarita, Dolores Zarita, had gone down to Dickinson Elementary and working through model cities, they created the Dickinson Community Lighted School, which meant that they opened the school. Now, these were two older, I mean, they had family, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But these two ladies saw that the kids needed somewhere to go. So they had the school, they went to school and they had the school open up in the evening for the neighborhood kids.
Wow.
We would have skate parties. Mrs.
Oh my
Tyler
gosh.
would teach us music. Mrs. Arita was in there. Matter of fact, I believe her later on, she started in Compton with the Feeding Seniors program. But, you know, what she did was she kept a lot of the kids off the street.
Yeah, she created that communal care. She created that place for kids to feel taken care of. That's amazing.
That community. And these were housewives.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, Mr. Johnson, we're going a little over time. Again, I could speak to you all day. I have had a wonderful time talking to you. I hope our attendees have enjoyed their time. You guys all asked great questions, but that's all the time we have for questions right now. This is going to conclude our program. Thank you to Mr. Johnson for joining us, and thank you to all of you for attending our program today. We hope you've enjoyed this author talk with Mr. Robert Lee Johnson. If you want more information about our virtual programs, like I stated before, visit our library website at lacountylibrary.org. For the latest library news and events, please follow us on social media. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye for now. Thank you so much for attending.